What is up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Guys, got a new video that was recommended to me when the government makes you get a surname. And I seen that this is a surname in Sweden, so we finna check this out. Appreciate you guys for sending me this recommendation. Y'all hit that subscribe button, send out more recommendations, and let's see why they make you get a surname.
In Sweden, back in the olden days, also known as the 1600s, your average Sven didn't really have a surname. There were some inherited family names placed after given names as we know them today, but they were borne by a relatively small section of the population. The nobility, especially the urradel, or original nobility, often had adelsnamn, noble names, according to their noble house. Some of these date back as far as the 1300s, and many were based on the family crest. In the early to mid 17th century, the entire nobility adopted surnames to distinguish them from the filthy commoners, reflecting their status as the highest caste in Swedish society. Meanwhile, a lot of the clergy had lärda namn, literally learned names, which had been in use since the Renaissance, and were thus inspired by the classics. They often ended in ander from Greek or us from Latin. In the latter case, the surnames would often have to agree with the natural gender of its holder. Us was after all a masculine ending, so the feminine a was preferred for women. A lot of the Latin-sounding names later dropped the us, leading to names ending in in or l. It's possible that this was done because of fashionability. People didn't want to be Lundinus anymore. They wanted to be Lundin, so it looked like their name came from French, which was much more fancy than Latin in the 1700s.
And that's interesting that they have this, because it's I always thought about that, especially like with my grandparents and great grandparents, because of how the names were and how much they kind of changed now, different things like that. This makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. I feel like the names are gonna be even more different as time goes on. What seem normal to us, they're gonna be different later because people are gonna be like, oh, let's change it up a bit. But this is very interesting.
But that's just a theory. Then there were the townspeople. Those who were more well off, like merchants, would often take surnames in imitation of the noblemen, possibly in order to imitate their status. These are known as borgerliga namn, bourgeois names. These were inspired by the noble names and learned names, but also by German family names, and importantly, place names. That's not to say that normal people all just had one name. As was common all over Scandinavia and beyond at the time, people tended to be referred to by their given name and a patronymic. A patronymic is a name formed from the name of your father, thus denoting whose child you are. For instance, if you take your average heterosexual Swedes, Lars and Karin, and they had a boy, Nils, he would be named Nils Larsson, contracted from Nils, Lars's son. And if they had a girl, let's say Sigrid, she would be named Sigrid Larsdotter, from Sigrid, Lars's daughter.
Wow, that is new. I guess now, I mean, ours is just really like junior, or you got the second or the third, the fourth, because my son actually is a junior. And I mean, some people like junior, but I've seen some people use the second at the end of it, so or the third, just carries down for generations and stuff like that. So this is different. This is
What makes this different from those gendered surnames from earlier is that the next generation, say Nils's children, wouldn't carry this on as a family name. No, they would be called so-and-so Nilsson or so-and-so Nilsdotter. Another type of byname, associated especially with the Dalarna region of Sweden, was Gårdsnamn. These weren't placed after the given name, but before it, like in Chinese or Korean, and they were closer to family names than patronymics, in that they were usually inherited from generation to generation. Some of these were fossilized patronymics, with someone called Pash Yuan not necessarily being the son of Pad, but having a male ancestor somewhere called Pad. Sometimes a man's ancestral name would actually be replaced with his wife's, like Ingrid's Yuan, being a Yuan who had gotten married to Ingrid. Other Gårdsnamn were simply a person's profession, like Smed Johan being John the Smith, something we can also see as an origin for many English surnames.
Is it like backwards, or like how? Because I heard that, what was it? I believe China, the names, they're actually, how do I put it? Basically, there's a basketball player named Yao Ming that played for the Houston Rockets, early 2000s and stuff. But they said in China, his name was actually Ming Yao. Like it was like reverse almost. Like yeah, we call them Yao Ming here in the United States, but they call them Ming Yao, I believe, in China. I thought that was interesting. I thought that was definitely different. So that's kind of what I'm getting off of this. But it looked like they changed last names.
Yeah, the U
If I'm
one
not
being
mistaken.
John the Smith, something we can also see as an origin for many English surnames. There were also those called after the village they or their ancestors were born in, typically when that family had moved village. So in the village of Norse, there might be a family called Utby, because of their origins in the neighbouring village. Though most famous are the bynames that were taken from farms. For instance, if there was a farm called Ustgården, the family living there might be called Ust. Sometimes it's difficult to tell the difference between one of these and a fossilized patronymic, since a farm might be called Pashgård, and then the family on that farm might be called Pash, even if they themselves had in fact bought the farm and were not descended from Pash.
So they pretty much named after things that they have or where they live by or at type thing. That's what I'm getting off of this. So I mean, I guess most people, what we claim our hood type thing. Uh, we'll just say that person named from such and such type. But this is different. This is different. I never heard
Where this gets
like
really
this.
interesting is that a lot of the time these bynames weren't just inherited by blood. Buying a farm can change your byname. Of course, apprentices could inherit the professional names of their masters. Families living on the same farm could all have the same byname without being blood relatives. Over in Iceland, they still use patronymics, or in the modern age, matronymics, but Swedish names are now pretty much all ancestral surnames. So how did these old naming systems disappear?
That means if they was in the States, like people move around a lot here in the States. That means they would be changing their name a lot.
In 1901, the Swedish government passed a law mandating fixed ancestral surnames for the entire Swedish population. Why? Well, one thing to remember is the rapid development of the state at this point in Scandinavian history. State records were becoming increasingly important, replacing traditional church records which would only record information within a certain parish. So having one standardized type of byname throughout the whole country is easier for centralized documentation. Sweden wanted to quote-unquote modernize. The Danes were doing it after all. In fact, Denmark had passed its first law making ancestral surnames compulsory all over the country in 1828. The many failures of this policy make up a whole story of their own, but it is likely that it had an effect on the Swedish authorities. The Swedish policy was far more successful, likely because many Swedes had already adopted surnames independently during the 19th century in a kind of natural transition. Many of the surnames that were assumed in the 1800s, and then after the law was passed in the early 1900s, were fossilized patronymics. Though the dotter ending pretty quickly died out because, of course it did. And that's why there's so many Swedes with son names, and it's the same reason why so many Danes have sen names, and there's so many son names in English-speaking communities. In fact, there were too many son names. This wasn't as much of a problem as sen names were in Denmark at the time, but it was still difficult to keep track of everyone in this rapidly changing world when there were so few names. Nearly 3% of those listed in the 1901 Swedish telephone registry had the surname Andersson. So then came a period in the first half of the 20th century where Swedes changed their surnames like crazy. Part of this was probably because of their own experiences in an increasingly urbanized Sweden. Being confused for the other Lars Andersson in Stockholm for the third time this week would probably make anyone consider changing that annoying frozen patronymic to something more unique. And of course, from the government's perspective, the point of making everyone get
that's
surname...
a lot of names. I feel like we have some. I mean, I don't know if y'all may have it too in Europe. We have things where we call it a nickname. I don't know where that came from. That just growing up, it was called a nickname. A name that somebody can call you that relates to you. I know growing up, my nickname, as y'all see, Darta Traveler, my first name is Dartannon, but my nickname or short name was Dar. Family gave me that. But in middle school, when I got to middle school, I was a skinny, tall kid, and my nickname was Sticks. So that stuck with me throughout the rest of my life, or still all of my life, because even though, I mean, y'all see, I got a little muscle. I got a little bit more muscle now, but people still call me Sticks because that's just the name that stuck with me. So you might as well say I got about 3 or 4 names myself.
names in the first place was for easier documentation, so unique surnames were all the better for them. They encouraged this practice by making changing your name much easier, and even publishing official state books of surname suggestions. The first of these being the 1921 Svensk namnbok till vägledning vid val av nya släktnamn, Swedish name book, for guidance at choosing of new family names. So loads of purely made-up surnames turned up in the 1900s in Sweden. Several branches of my own family changed their names in this period. One part of my ancestry changed their names from Pettersson to Vernulf. This name is, linguistically speaking, ridiculous. This W was not used at the time in Swedish orthography, making the name look German in origin, but German doesn't use this letter. Like Swedish, it uses this symbol instead, making this look more like it might be an antiquated Danish name. But what on earth does Van mean? Is this supposed to be from Dutch? Middle English? The answer is it doesn't have a meaning. My great-granddad and his brothers made it up. It's a fairy tale name, and there's loads of people in Sweden walking around with this kind of gibberish surname. And you know what? I think that's cool. Of course, the policy was never going to be a complete success. I mean, the government needed, or rather wanted, a standardized way of recording names. And it's not exactly a coincidence that they chose the way already used by the nobility and the rich. In the communities that were unused to after names, which were almost entirely rural and generally quite poor, like in Dalarna, where Gårdsnamn were the main style of surname, the 1901 law was met with resistance. In fact, some of them continued to fight it for over a century, and laws protecting the use of Gårdsnamn were finally enacted in 2016. Wow, isn't it interesting how much local culture and tradition is lost with the creation of the modern state, and how the cultural practices of the rich and privileged are prioritized over those of other communities? I mean, what am I saying? Let's not get political here.
That was different. Yeah, the surnames. I feel like, I don't know, I feel like we have surnames, or we have, or no, I think that's a suffix. I believe that's what we call it down. Because we just, with the Mr., Mrs., and all that stuff, like, we add those type of things. But like I said, the nicknames, that's what we called it growing up. It might be the slang term, but, you know, I know everybody has one, you know. You kind of feel solidified when you had a nickname. So, but appreciate you guys for sending me this. At first, I was confused. I was like, wait, so you can just change your name anytime you want to type thing? And I seen some of it seemed like people had like 10 names in their lifetime type thing. But y'all let me know if you have some of these surnames, or, you know, have you changed your surname before? But that's all I have. Y'all hit that subscribe button, send down those recommendations, and y'all be blessed, be the best, and be you. I'm out.